think about the things that matter to you. Think about the ways in which you want to make a contribution and do it now. Don't wait 5 years. Don't wait 10 years. Make the contribution you want to do now and focus in on those things that matter to you and the ways in which you want to make an impact in your community or in your organization or as leaders.
Welcome everyone to our very first episode of the Haskayne MBA Society podcast. My name is Vignesh Vembu and I'm incredibly excited to kick off this initiative where we bring in insightful conversations with business leaders, faculties, and alumni to our MBA community. For our first episode, we have Dr. Gina Grandy here with us, who is the first appointed Women Dean of the Haskayne School of Business. It's a pleasure having you here, Dr. Grandy.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be here. It's my pleasure.
For me, going through the journey was completely interesting. I'll just start with a fun and personal question. Are you more of a beach person or a prairies person? How's it been so far?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, you're absolutely right in regards to my path. My path has been, I'm making my way across the country, if it looks like that, but really happy to be in Calgary. Here's what I'll say is, right now, I feel like I have the best of both worlds. So every morning when I come to work, I get to see the mountains, and that never gets old. I think though what I would say, like perhaps most people who have grown up by the ocean and by the sea, you always miss the smell of the ocean if you're not next to it. We have a summer home in Newfoundland, and my parents are still there. So I get back as often as I can. So I kind of get the ocean, and I also get the mountains. What I would say is how I would describe the impact of the sea and the ocean, and perhaps less of kind of maybe beach. What I would say is, and I didn't realize it until much later in my life, it is as if I'm holding my breath until I see the sea and smell the sea. And then all of a sudden I feel like I exhale. So I don't think the saying, I think, goes, you can take the Newfoundlander out of Newfoundland, but you can't take Newfoundland. And so that's partially about the sea, but also partially about my roots. And very grateful to be here. Love the mountains, but always, you miss the smell of the ocean.
Even the part that I'm from back home, that is a coastal place as well. So moving from a tropical region, especially with where it reaches very frequently over and above 30 degrees Celsius, and moving right across the hemisphere where it's minus 25 outside right now. So it's been quite a drastic change as well, and I'm completely loving this place.
Yeah, what I can say though is I didn't move from anywhere tropical, so I think you will feel that harder than I do. I mean, Newfoundland is not known for its pleasant winters, although the weather can be lovely. But yeah, moving from somewhere tropical to Calgary this time of year can be shocking, but we do have lovely summers here.
Yeah. No, I've been so far enjoying winters as well, especially going for ice skating and going outdoors during winter. It's been amazing.
Yeah.
So how I've structured this podcast is into multiple segments.
Sure.
I'll just have 3 segments where we initially start with leadership and more focus into your experiences. And then we'll move on to how your experience has been so far with as a dean in Haskayne School of Business, and then academic advices and career advices to the current MBA students. And then we'll have the last segment where we'll conclude.
Yeah,
Good?
Absolutely.
Perfect. The first segment that we will begin is into leadership. So moving from Newfoundland to Calgary, right? Your journey has been quite a long journey. So the first thing that I would ask you is, growing up, your parents have continuously emphasized that, education changes life. So how have this principle or this philosophy changed in you, or how has this impacted you as a person in your professional journey?
You had talked about how I had grew up in relatively humble beginnings. I would say yes, but still relatively privileged. I grew up in a home where I always knew I was going to university. I didn't know what I was going to do, but always knew I was going to university. And not everyone can say that. As you said, my dad is a retired teacher, my mother's a retired nurse, but they made sacrifices. And I would say my grandparents before them made sacrifices so that I had those choices. My parents grew up in what we might describe in humble background. I would say I had a very privileged by the time it came to me. They wouldn't describe it this way. I would describe it as in many ways perhaps close to poverty. They would not describe it that way, but rural community. My grandparents didn't have access to higher education, but education was really important to my grandparents for my parents. So they made sacrifices so that my dad went to university to become a teacher. My mother went to become a nurse. Because of, I would say, that one generation of having access to higher education, it changed my life and changed the generations that follow me and follow my siblings. And that's when, that notion of, I believe that access to higher education does change lives and changes generations. And that's why I know what we do here at Haskayne in universities, I would say in the role that I have, is that what we do matters, because in facilitating opportunities for other people, it creates an opportunity for change. And that affects social outcomes, that affects economic outcomes, that affects the communities that surround us and the families that are impacted by it.
Like especially when, coming up, I think your parents were the first in your family to have the post-secondary education. So I do understand, like, it's been a completely, like their journey will be completely inspiring to you, like starting from scratch. So
Yeah.
taking it forward to like leaps and bounds ahead, like the way you have taken it forward, I think it's a completely inspiring journey.
Some days, but yes, thank you. Yeah. But again, I would say my path was, I grew up in a home whereby I was very privileged. I would have been shielded from, I would say, the types of sacrifices that they made. And you don't realize those things until you're older and you reflect back and kind of think, oh yeah, I always knew I was going to go to university. And not everybody has that opportunity, but really it became because they had access to higher education that then changed my life, my brother's life, my niece and nephew's life, and the generations that will come.
No, it's very interesting to hear that how your parents' journey has inspired your professional journey indeed. So that brings me to the next question, where I want to ask you, like, you've always mentioned yourself as a reluctant leader. So can you share how mentorship and sponsorship has been an integral part of your leadership?
Absolutely. I never aspired to be a dean. Not because I didn't think the work was important, but as an academic, I loved my teaching. I loved my research. The service contributions I made were important. I had held several informal leadership roles, but I really didn't have that desire to be the leader. I was fortunate to have lots of people who, I might say, softly nudged me. They might say they kind of pushed me into it. And so I'll give an example. I was asked by a former dean who was my boss if I wanted to step into an associate dean role temporarily while someone was going on leave. My initial response to him was, thank you, but no. I said, I like what I'm doing, but then I said, give me this weekend. I decided, because I had a good relationship with that person, I'm curious, I like to learn. I said, okay, I'll do it for 6 months. Then led into an opportunity for the associate dean role, which I still wasn't sure I was going to do, but I had great people around me to say, Gina, why don't you think about this? Why don't you do this? Then similar, when the dean role came up, I just said, no, I'm happy doing what I'm doing. But I had several people who shoulder tapped me. Several people, I would also say, who empowered me, were champions and sponsors of me. So they often, if there were opportunities, they would say, Gina, I think you would be great for this. They used my name. They shoulder tapped me to say, I think you should apply. And quite frankly, I don't think I would have applied had I not had those people who gave me opportunities, encouraged me, and kind of challenged me to say, why won't you do this? And so I would not be in the roles I'm in right now. I am confident without having sponsors and mentors. And what's really interesting is I never was involved in a formal mentorship relationship or program, but I had a lot of, and still do, an awful lot of informal mentors that have given me great gifts and helped to create paths for me. And so I cannot overemphasize how important those relationships have been. Sometimes other people see something in you that you don't see yourself, or that you choose to deny, right? You think, I don't want to do that right now. And so I wouldn't be a dean before And I can even say that there were people who shoulder tapped me to apply for the current role. And my first answer was no, because there were things I wanted to do where I was. But it was through those conversations and people lifting me up that kind of made me think, well, no, actually, I want to think twice about this. And I think there's gifts in that about sometimes saying yes when we think it mightn't be the right timing, when we think that actually it mightn't be the job that you want. But I cannot overemphasize how important sponsorship and mentorship. And I've had many people in my lives who've been gifts to me.
True, very true. Because moving to a new city, like for me in 2023, where I started meeting new people here as well at Haskayne. The first mentorship program that I was part of was the BMO mentorship program, where I was mentored by one of the very senior, I think she was one of the chief of staff for hiring. So she was one of my mentors, and right after that, since then, like I've had multiple mentors throughout my academic journey who have been like really instrumental in my growth as well. Like, so I do understand, like when you say, like I'm able to relate that how mentorship can significantly impact your journey in life.
Yeah, and I would also say that the sponsorship is so important. Mentors will often give us advice. Sponsors to me are the people who are your champions, who give your name. Right? When someone's looking for someone, they're the person who they'll put their neck on the line to say, actually, you need to have a conversation with me or with you. And so we do need those sponsors as well. So more than advice, they're also willing to put your name out there for a possibility. And there are several people who've done that for me.
So that reminds me of something that you mentioned before, breaking the glass of hesitation. So what advice would you give women who are hesitant to step into leadership roles?
What we know from research is there are all sorts of reasons why women may be more reluctant or hesitant to step into leadership roles. And I won't go into all of it, and there's lots of good reasons why. A couple of things I will say, though. What we know is that women are less likely to apply for jobs unless they think they have 100% of the criteria or qualifications required. I think the research says men are likely 60, 70% and they will apply. There are all sorts of reasons around that. But here's what I can say. Women make up 50% or more of the labor force. And that is not what we see in leadership roles in organizations. You'll see it in some, but we don't see that consistently at the kind of as we move up the hierarchy. We need more women in leadership roles. I don't want to pretend. Leadership is hard some days, but we need more women in leadership roles. And what I would say to people is, I don't think you're ever fully ready for some of the responsibilities that come with it. And if you wait to say, I need all these experiences, or this needs to be a certain way, then I don't think we'll ever step forward. The other thing that I would say is our organizations need more women, because there are also, when we look to organizations where we don't have a gender balance, women stepping into leadership roles, it's also actually harder for them because the cultures are not ready and they're not inclusive. So we still have lots of work to do. It does not mean it's easy, but I would say it's important. And what I will say is, when I was shoulder tapped to step into the dean role first, and I kind of said, no, I don't think so. One of, not the only, but one of the motivating factors for me was I was teaching a women in leadership course at the grad level. And in that class, I would be telling women about all the stats, women don't step forward, or we don't have enough women. And I would be encouraging them to do so. And when the opportunity came to me, and I was reluctant, how can I tell other women how important it is to have women in leadership roles if I'm not willing to put my name forward and to think about it and to try it out? And so that was one of the motivating factors for me to put my name forward. I thought, I'll never be able to tell another woman we need more women if I'm not willing to put my name forward and to try it out. So it can be hard. We are never perfectly ready. We are never perfect leaders, but there are a lot of great women and men out there that are reluctant to step into roles, but we need more good leaders who are willing to try.
And I think that's a very valuable advice. And many of our listeners who are listening to this podcast, especially, like would definitely take this as an inspiration and take up more leadership roles. That is what we are aspiring as well. And can you share a personal story from your journey, that could inspire women, or that would be a great advice to the listeners?
I'm not so sure how inspirational is, but I'll give an example of a couple of things perhaps. One, I would say, is I do try to be quite pragmatic in the sense of what my mother would say, choose your battles. So you can't take on everything. When you're in a leadership role, you can't fix everything. And so I try to be pragmatic about, where I direct my energy and, also assessing, okay, is this something we're likely going to be able to move forward? But I also think sometimes as a leader, you have to be able to dream that the impossible is possible. And I'll give you an example. In my previous role as dean, and it's not going to sound all that inspirational till I tell you what my colleague said to me after. Haskayne is accredited through AACSB and other bodies. The last school where I was, we weren't, but we were moving towards that journey. I could see that the school could get there. It was going to be a lot of work, but we were doing, I think, all the right things. So we were starting that journey. And I remember having a conversation with some of the leaders alongside me because we had to do a lot of work to get that initial step in. They were courageous leaders and they spoke frankly to me and they said, look, I don't think we can do this. Let's ask for an extension. Let's do this. And I said, and rarely did I pull that card as a leader, but I said to them, we have made a commitment to meet this deadline and we are going to move forward with it. And I think I may have even gone as far to say, if you can't do this, I will. Later, and so we did meet it. We submitted the initial, they don't have accreditation yet, but they're close. We submitted it, everybody did a lot of work. And it was successful in that initial step. My colleague, about 6 months later, 8 months later, said to me, Gina, when we had that conversation last year, because there were two of them, we really didn't think we were going to be able to do this, but you were determined that we could. And he said, we had a side conversation where we said, look, this is clearly very important. She thinks we can do this, so we're going to have to support her as best as we can. And his final comment to me was, he said, Gina, you taught us that what sometimes looks impossible is possible. And I don't think you can do that for everything. But I do think sometimes you have to be able to, decide what you see as the future and be able to convince, motivate, bring other people along until they get to a point where they can also see that what initially might have seemed impossible is actually possible. So I would say you can't choose everything impossible. And I think it's one of the Alice in Wonderland movies that make some reference to say, dream 6 impossible things before noon, or that's not quite right. But I would say that would be what I would say is, you want to have your feet on the ground, but sometimes you have to be able to see a different future than the present and find ways to be able to help create a path so people can also see that future.
I love hearing personal stories because they provide a very real and relatable perspective on leadership. So now let's move our focus into your leadership at Haskayne. So this segment is completely into how your journey in Haskayne has been so far. So how does it feel actually to be the first appointed women dean of Haskayne School of Business? How has this milestone influenced or impacted your journey?
Yeah, it's a great question. What's really interesting is keep in mind that, so I'm the first woman dean. I think there was maybe an interim or a short period of time where there was a woman dean at Haskayne, but first kind of full term. But this is not my first time as dean. Mm-hmm. And in my last place, I wasn't the first woman dean. So here's what I will say is, I think in some instances, it's a bigger deal for other people than it is for me. Now, don't get me wrong. I firmly believe you have to see it to believe it. I think in some ways, it's still a bit shocking to me that in 2023, that we're still talking about first women deans, that type of thing. When it comes to being dean, I've been a dean before, so I'm used to those types of things. I think it's probably different if you asked my colleagues. Is it different for them? What I can say is it's very interesting to me sometimes how students respond. We were at a recruiting session for our graduate programs last year, and this woman came up to me who was there, and she had said, I saw your video. I didn't know even what video she was talking about, but it was probably some clip of something, and made a comment to say, I never had really considered, could I do this, or would this be the right path? Hearing your story led me to think about I should come to have a conversation. And so that kind of inspiration, if that's what it was, can happen from any leader. But in this particular instance, it was a woman who somehow on some level connected based on what my story was or what I said. And so that's important. It's just as important for all of our students to have people they can identify with. But, it's a privilege to be dean at Haskayne. It's a privilege to be the first woman dean. But I would just say, Haskayne, why did it take so long for us to have a woman dean?
Before you, I think it was Jim who was there for like 10 years.
Yeah.
And like you had been there in Regina for 5 years.
Yeah.
So I think like taking up this role like once again and taking it, you've done an amazing job so far, and stepping into the shoes of dean and taking it forward. It's a very challenging role and responsibility, right? Like being a dean at such a big prestigious business school, it comes up with a lot of challenges that you face every day in and day out.
But I would say that regardless of the leadership role, leadership does come with those challenges. I often will say, and not to minimize some of those challenges because, we deal with some really serious things. But I also would say, rather than challenges, sometimes I try to frame them as puzzles. I've been very fortunate because I've followed Jim DeWalt, as you've mentioned. Jim and I knew each other as dean colleagues before. He's been a great supporter, a great champion. We have a great relationship. And, I walk into a school like Matheson Hall, the facilities that, through his leadership and community support. So very fortunate to follow someone like Jim DeWalt. And, that's a privilege and that's great as well.
Let's talk about the bigger picture here, especially in terms of student success and student career growth. We have seen that Canadian job market has been like highly competitive, and students are not just students, like people are usually struggling to find their dream role. So what advice would you give students who are looking out for their dream role, or trying to look out for a niche in their domain?
My vision for Haskayne, it would always be student focused and student centric. So regardless of the path, regardless of the program, it's really, really important for us to create life-changing opportunities for them to decide the path. One of the things I love about Haskayne, regardless of the program, is in many ways, it's sort of like choose your own adventure. In our undergrad programs, we have a number of concentrations that people can choose, but lots of our students, interestingly, take the general concentration. And I think that reflects that notion of students figuring out, well, actually, I want to learn a little more about risk management. I want to learn a little more about finance. I want to learn a little bit more about supply chain management. And that's actually what I hear from industry. Industry wants students to have some level of technical, but they often will say, yeah, but we'll teach them then when they come in. And so I think we offer lots of opportunities for students. On the undergrad level, I would say that too often we think we're at an undergrad level, you have to have this depth and technical expertise. Where you're young, you still have your career ahead of you. What employers want are people who have, some level of knowledge and expertise, but actually are able to be flexible, are able to learn, engage in critical thinking. At the grad level, we offer a number of programs, but I would also say, for example, in our MBA, and maybe you can say, no, I'm wrong or I'm right on this. We offer specializations, but again, what I hear from some students is the notion of they love to be able to have the flexibility to choose the courses where they know they have gaps or they want to stretch and learn. And I believe that's one of the things that our programs will offer. So if you do want to do a specialization in entrepreneurship or a specialization in finance, our programs offer that to you, but they also offer you that opportunity to figure it out along the way. what I would say from my own personal experience is sometimes we learn the most from the things we realize we don't want to do. And, where else do you get the opportunity to do that than actually while you're in university? And so I think if you want that specialization in our grad programs, you can get it. But I would say also to keep in mind, rarely do we get the opportunity to explore and stretch and learn. Take our adventure leadership course, take one of our CDL Rockies course, take those unique courses that actually you're only going to get at Haskayne. Take advantage of those networking opportunities, our mentorship programs, because that's where the niche happens. That's where you figure out what it is you want to be when you grow up. And it's through that experimentation that I believe that you figure out kind of what kind of mark you want to make in your career. And here, we provide so many outside of the classroom opportunities to create those paths for you to have those conversations. Say, oh yeah, I'd like to try that.
Yeah, absolutely true. Because I remember the first semester that I began with here at Haskayne, and I thought of like these are the courses that I want to take for the next 4 or 5 semesters. But honestly, like I ended up taking like completely a different set of courses because the moment I started taking different courses, especially the ones like CDLs, where I believe that experiential learning is the key to growth as well for student success. I've done CDL, I've been a part of CDL for the last 5 months, and it's been amazing.
Yeah.
And not just CDL, I think I've taken courses from different disciplines, from real estate,
Good for you.
entrepreneurship, from finance. Yeah, so it's been like whenever I take up a new course, it opens a completely new door for me, completely new door of opportunities, and to explore that field, something that I didn't think so. Like when I joined, like I thought of taking mostly like courses related to finance and mostly related to like what I wanted to take. But honestly, like meeting new people and like having a new mentors, they're like always being open, like it gives you a lot more opportunities than much more being much more narrow focused.
I agree. And what I will say is you can never go wrong with a finance major or concentration. So don't get me wrong. But I will also say that, this is a time for you to be able to create your own adventure in your MBA. And it's through that I would then say paths open up where, you have that adaptability, you have stronger leadership skills, and that alongside your technical background means you'll have more paths.
As a follow-up, I just wanted to ask you, like, apart from those technical expertise, what are the other skills or like one particular skill that you think students should develop or cultivate to achieve long-term success?
I don't know if you'd call it a skill. Maybe it's an attribute, or maybe I'm not quite sure. One of the things I would say is curiosity. And that goes, side by side with that experimentation. But I would say when you are driven by a curiosity, that's when innovation is like a creativity. There's all sorts of things. So I would say, harness that curiosity. And I think that would be one of the things alongside along the technical expertise. The other thing I would say, though, is in my experience as a leader, 90%, I'm making up the figure, but 90% of what we encounter, the challenges and the exciting things are related to people. And your technical skills are critically important, but harnessing and developing a strong emotional intelligence, you cannot go wrong. Understanding people, relating to people. So a strong sense of emotional intelligence would be critically important, I think, to success, and whether it's leadership or otherwise. Very rarely do you operate by yourself, whether you're an entrepreneur or not. Those relationships are important. And so emotional intelligence, but also I would say relationship building. We never get anywhere on our own. We only do that as a collective or in collaboration with others. So knowing how to build those relationships, building trust, understanding people, those what we often refer to, I think, wrongly as soft skills, because I think as you practice them, they're not really soft skills. Without them, you can have exceptional technical skills, but actually you won't get very far unless you're able to work alongside people and understand people.
Yeah, so true. Because like a city like Calgary, where it's more close knitted and where like anyone that you meet or any possible networking that you do, you never know, like you bump into the same person one day or the other. And especially in a small community, I think it's very important to develop those relationships with people and harness them to see like, because each connection that you have is a strength for you. So like the more that you're building your connection, the more that you're like developing your network, I think it's always a strength
agree.
to not just to students like me, but to anyone who is moving ahead in their career or anyone who is looking forward for more opportunities.
That's right. I agree. I agree.
We are in our final segment, like we are just closing. And before that, like I would like to ask you one question. So if you'd have to name just one book or one person who has profound influence on your leadership, what would that be?
Many books, I would say, and I don't know if I would say it was the most profound. One I would say that is one that I carry over time. So Cotter, you probably know from some of your courses, did kind of the model of change, the 8 steps of change. One of the books that he did was called The Heart of Change. And the way the book was structured was around stories. So rather than kind of, the list of the 8 steps of change, for every step, he actually included stories of organizations that had done it well and examples of it. That approach to telling how to lead change and move through, very powerful. Old book, great book. But there's lots of others. If I were to talk about a person and I could only choose one, so many people I could talk about that have influenced perhaps my leadership. And I think it goes back to values. And if I had to choose one, I probably would say my mother, who has been a leader, but I would say in a more informal capacity. But I would say values driven, and I'll tell you why. I would say my mother and my grandmothers, they are resilient, they are kind, they are tolerant, they also have tons of energy. And so when I think about, I don't think actually I'm as tolerant as they are. I try, but I don't think I am. But when it comes to, as a leader, the being empathetic, but also being able to make difficult decisions, I would say that has come really in many ways from my mother. So my mother is one of the kindest people that you could meet, but she can make a difficult decision. She can hold her own. She is resilient in the face of challenges, and she has tons and tons of energy. So not a leader in a sense that people we would think of kind of a particular person, a famous person, but those values, those strengths would be things that I have tried my best to emulate in my own leadership. I'm not sure I do it well every day, but I certainly have tried, and I have role models that I can look to inspire and remind me of how important it is to live leadership with those strengths and those attributes.
Like when you mentioned the word tolerant, like I was just reminded of my childhood days where I used to be completely mischievous, and I'm sure like my mom was very tolerant, because if I were into her shoes, I don't think so like I would have been so tolerant. And she's highly energetic, she's resilient, and trust me, like anything that like if I need advice with the most difficult things, they do it like this. I think like they're really good at, like my mom is really good at taking tough decisions, and also like she finds a way out of everything. Like if you're any difficult situation, she'll make way out of that. Yeah, I think that's a really growing up, like you're looking at them, and I think the first leader for you is your parents. For anyone growing up, I think they play a huge role in shaping up our life.
I agree. I agree.
Finally, it's a wrap up. That was an incredible conversation with you. And thank you so much for being here today, sharing your insights, experiences, and journey with us. For the listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. This is just the first episode of our Haskayne MBA Society podcast. Please follow us on social media to have more conversations, and we appreciate your support.